of you who are at the back, you can be seated. Am I audible at the back? Sunai de raha hai na? Okay. So, welcome to our next panel. I'll just briefly introduce them, and then we can have a round of questions for them, right? So we have Ujjwal with us, who's been working in education for the last 15 years. He's a senior program manager at HT Parekh Foundation, and he's prior to coming into education, he's had a corporate background. He's worked with Tata Trusts. His experience, has spanned different aspects in education. He's worked with NGOs, he's worked with private companies, he's seen the different aspects of the funding ecosystem. So we are very pleased to have Ujjwal on the panel with us. Seated next is Atanu. Atanu has been working in elementary education for some 3 decades now. He's a deputy director at Vikramshila Education Resource Center. Vikramshila is one of the oldest partners of Wipro Foundation. Wipro Foundation's work in education. Atanuda's experience, would be like saying almost everything in education. So, it's like teacher education, curriculum, education planning and management, with a lot of focus now on foundational literacy and numeracy and NEP implementation in different states, and the Nipun Bharat program. So, that's about Atanuda. We're very pleased to have you on the panel, Atanu. Third panelist, it's again going to be difficult to introduce a veteran like Arvind. He's, let's say he's seen it all in education, right? Is that a fair way of introducing you, or maybe you're going to see a lot more coming in? So, you've been in education since early 70s.
No, mid-80s.
Mid-80s, yeah. And you've seen at least 3-4 phases, of the kind of transitions that have happened in education. Bio में आपने पढ़ा होगा कि social science group में एकलव्या में काम करते हैं, ऐसा सब bio में लिखा हुआ है, लेकिन he's been part of so many different aspects. He's worked with NCERT, worked with SCERT, worked in curriculum textbooks, particularly deeply in social science, but also been looking at these kind of policy transitions. I personally have learned a lot from Arvind, visits to Bhopal and the discussions that happened at Eklavya. So we hope to benefit from some of that in this panel today. Happy to have you here, sir.
Thanks.
Okay, so as we start, just a reminder of the time thing. What we are trying to achieve is we'll be speaking till around 12, and then we'll open up for questions. Main thing is at 12:30 we have a hard stop. So when it comes to questions, we'll need to, at some point, if it gets closer to 12:30, we'll have to do the hard stop, because as it was announced in the morning, right? 12:30 को हमें बंद करना पड़ेगा. तो just to keep that at the back of our minds. तो अरविंद जी आपसे शुरू करते हैं. एक दो कि चीज़ें हमें ये जाननी थी कि आप अगर 20 साल पहले देखें और अभी देखें तो क्या 20 years back what were the key concerns in education, क्या discussion हुआ करते थे, और अभी अगर if you look at 2022, right, what are the kind of things that we talk about? What is it that from your kind of perspective when you look at this whole landscape, right? Particularly in terms of education policy, because I forgot to mention the title. Compared to the previous panel, which was about organizations and their experiences in education, इस पैनल में हम एजुकेशन लैंडस्केप को देख रहे हैं कि ये 20 साल में क्या बदलाव आए हैं एजुकेशन में, पॉलिसी में, और सिविल सोसाइटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस में उनके रोल में वो खुद को कैसे देखते हैं, गवर्नमेंट उनको कैसे देखती है. इन मामलों में जो ट्रांजिशंस आए हैं उसको थोड़ा क्लोजली देख रहे हैं इस सेशन में. तो उस पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से Arvind, if you could share your point on what has this 20 years been with education policy.
Is the mic on?
Can you hear Arvind at the back?
आप सभी को नमस्कार. मैं कोशिश करूँगा कि हिंदी अंग्रेज़ी दोनों में करूँ. आपको जब भी कुछ कहना हो या इफ़ यू फील दैट इंग्लिश वुड बी बेटर और एनी प्लेस यू कैन जस्ट पॉइंट आउट. पहली बात तो मुझे थोड़ा सा ये श्रीकांत के कहने से लगा कि मैंने कुछ जो लिखा है उसको करूं या जो मन में आ रहा है एकदम पहले उससे शुरू करूं. तो अभी मैं सोच रहा हूं कि जो मन में है उसको उससे शुरू करता हूं. और शायद क्योंकि हम लोग 2-3 दिन एक साथ हैं तो मौके मिलेंगे बातचीत करने की, थोड़ी और गहराई में चीज़ें समझने के लिए. तो आई थिंक दैट माइट बी बेटर. आई विल रेफर टू सम पॉलिसी इश्यूज़ विच आर कंटेम्प्रेरी एंड विच आर जो काफ़ी कुछ बदलाव आ गया है. एक अच्छी बात यह है पुराने पैनल्स के बात करते हुए कि मैं अभी जहाँ से आ रहा हूँ और किसी ने कहा कि हम क्यों नहीं डेकेड्स में सोच ले या एक सेंचुरी सोच ले, तो शायद मैं उसी जगह से आ रहा हूँ. अभी एकलव्य ने और HSTP ने 50 साल पूरे किए हैं. तो ये और होशंगाबाद से ही कुछ दिन पहले एक हमने शिक्षकों के साथ बैठक की थी और वहाँ हम सब मिले थे. मैं अपना परिचित ना दे दूं कि मैं भी एकलव्य में 30 साल रहा हूँ और एकलव्य की जो शुरुआत होती है वो किशोर भारती और फ्रेंड्स रूरल सेंटर से होती है और होशंगाबाद विज्ञान कार्यक्रम से होती है. तो एकलव्य के बारे में जानने के लिए जब भी आप चाहेंगे या उस जर्नी के बारे में तो शायद अलग से कभी भी हम मिल सकते हैं. बट जैसे उन्होंने कहा कि हम क्यों ये 20 साल सोचे या वो, चलो 50 साल तो मैं ही कह रहा हूँ, हो सकता है कि हम 100 साल भी सोच लेंगे. और बहुत अच्छी बात है कि ऐसे कॉम्बिनेशंस एक जो जहन में ज़रूर आ रहा है कि जब एकलव्य में बना था तो ये बहुत आसान नहीं था सोचना कि ऐसे कुछ चीज़ें एक साथ आएंगी. अभी अनिल भाई ने भी वहाँ कहा था कि मैं जुड़ तो गया था बट मुझे नहीं लगा था कि कुछ ज़्यादा, किसी ने आके मेरे को धक्का दिया तो फिर मैं आगे आ गया. एंड somebody said कि अच्छा shall we do it? I said state will never give you permission. But there is one large movement at that time of people in science who wanted to work for the country, and scientific temper was very close to them, and a lot of them had a great exposure to science education both in the country and outside. उनका और राजनीति क्षेत्र में कुछ लोगों का और ब्यूरोक्रेसी में कुछ लोगों का ऐसा, there are some times that some things will meet and will sponsor things out. So these are not very predictable at certain points of time, but they do happen. And I'm very glad that 20-25 years ago when Wipro first came, we never thought that you would get into all this. Frankly, I said ये अच्छी बातें हैं, they are coming to talk to us and things like that. पर हो सकता है कि कुछ थोड़ी बात करेंगे और फिर बोलेंगे यार
उस पहले मीटिंग के बारे में कुछ मैंने उस साइड से सुना है, मैं भी यहाँ नहीं बोल रहा हूँ.
नहीं, एक बहुत अच्छी बात थी जो एक विजय गुप्ता थे विप्रो में, शायद सीनियर वाइस प्रेसिडेंट थे, वो हम मेरी क्लास में आए इंदौर में और तो मैंने कहा आप यहाँ कैसे आ गए, मतलब क्या, तो बोले कि हम साइंस एजुकेशन में कुछ सोच रहे हैं. तो पहले मुझे भी लगा पता नहीं क्या सोच रहे हैं. फिर उन्होंने एक बात कही जो बिल्कुल जमी और अभी तक उन्होंने कहा कि हम इतने सारे साइंटिस्ट और इंजीनियर्स के साथ काम करते हैं जिनका साइंस बैकग्राउंड रहता है और हमें लगता है कि उन्होंने पढ़ाई बहुत अच्छे से की है, बट कहीं ना कहीं एक कमी महसूस होती है. वो एक लीक से हट के नहीं सोच सकते. कुछ चीज़ बता दो तो कर लेंगे, बट कोई चीज़ को क्रिएट करना हो, कुछ चीज़ ये करना हो, वो नहीं कर सकते. हमने कहा यही तो असली बात है. और अगर कोई व्यक्ति ऐसा सोचता है और ढूंढते हुए देश भर में घूम रहा है तो ज़रूर कुछ ना कुछ ये करेंगे. एंड दैट्स व्हेन वी टुक इट वेरी सीरियसली एंड वी सेड कि हाँ ये कोई ऐसा प्रोग्राम के लिए नहीं आए हैं कि हम ऐसा कुछ कर रहे हैं, आप आ जाइए एंड वील डू समथिंग एंड एक बैनर लग जाएगा और कुछ आगे होगा. एंड आई एम वेरी ग्लैड कि दैट वी कैन थिंक ऑफ इंस्टीट्यूशंस और डिफरेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस कमिंग टुगेदर. ये बहुत आसान नहीं होता, बट ऐसा सोच पाना बहुत अच्छी बात है फॉर फ्यूचर जनरेशंस. सो इवन व्हेन आई लुक एट HSTP एंड द अदर थिंग्स कि वो 1972 में जो लोग आए थे और उन लोगों ने जो शुरू करने के उनके अलग सपने थे और 80s और 90s में जो हम लोग आए अलग हैं। आज जब हम देखते हैं तो कभी कभी लगता है like somebody asked us, my own colleague asked me some time ago, were we so naive to think ये स्टेट हम जो बना रहे हैं, जिस किसी ने अभी कहा था पिछले सेशन में proof of concept. See, one clear thing about is that you can make a proof of concept, but it may not go to scale. It is not the lack of proof of concept, but it is also a lack of political and economic will of coming together. So proof of concept, I think we did adequately in 30 years, but as far as social and political movements, we were inadequate. So that's why this friend of my own colleague, after 30 years of work, that were we so naive? I mean, why I'm saying is that I've done textbooks for many states, and we have been thrown out of many states. मतलब आप सोचो कि अगर हम 4 साल 5 साल लग के किसी स्टेट के करिकुलम में रिफॉर्म किए और फिर अचानक एक दिन वो कह देते हैं कि नहीं सर आपकी ज़रूरत नहीं है, जब लगेगी आप तो हम आपको याद कर लेंगे, and that means कि that is the end of the program. That's how we also thought that NCERT might end, but it didn't end like that. So there are possibilities that you may not visualize, and there are possibilities that don't always take on political colors that we see. हम जो सोचते हैं ये रंग है वैसा है, उसके बहुत अलग अलग अंदर के डायनामिक्स और अंदर की लेयर्स होते हैं जो कुछ चीज़ों को डिटरमिन करते हैं. एक छोटी और कहानी बता दें, हमने राजस्थान में करिकुलम में शायद 2 या 3 बार किया और तीनों बार बाहर आ गए. हाँ, पहली बार किया लोक जुम्बिश के साथ, और लोक जुम्बिश के साथ ट्रायल्स किए पिसांगन ब्लॉक और पूरे लोक जुम्बिश की पूरे प्रोग्राम में, और कहीं पोखरन हो गया और स्वीडिश जो सपोर्ट था वो हट गया. तो एक दिन हम सेक्रेटरी के साथ बात कर रहे थे, अगले दिन हम मैदान में थे और उन्होंने कह दिया अब आप घर जा सकते हैं. तो so we worked on, let's say, class 6 and 7th, and by the time you wanted to make a systemic changes and teacher training, you came out. So I think the battle with the systemic things will continue, and it is not like not like a product thing that कि ये अब आ गया है और ये चलता रहेगा. ये एक संघर्ष बना रहेगा, और कौन सी चीज़ें कितने ज़्यादा चलेंगी, कितने समय तक चलेंगी, is not always predictable. And I would agree with what Shabnam and others said, that एक हद तक प्रयास करना ही एक मकसद है, और उसके बाद फिर आप, पर उसके साथ आप दोनों प्रयास करिए. एक प्रयास करिए जो आप सोचते हैं कि ये अच्छा एजुकेशन होगा, अच्छा विज्ञान का एजुकेशन होगा, अच्छा गणित का होगा, जैसे भी रूप से एक उस तरह का प्रयास है, उसमें रिगर, उसमें रिसर्च, उसमें वो चीज़ें ज़रूर रखिए. पर एक ये भी प्रयास करिए कि इंस्टीट्यूशंस को और समाज को लाने की क्या क्या क्रॉस हो सकता है. आज हम यहाँ बैठे हैं, कल और राजनीतिक क्षेत्र में बैठ के लोग मंथन करें, तो वो प्रयास आगे बढ़ते हैं, और उसका कोई एक फॉर्मूला नहीं है, और शायद अलग अलग लोग अपने कॉन्टेक्स्ट में वो चीज़ें ज़रूर निकालेंगे. बहुत समय ना लेते हुए वर्तमान समय के लिए, इफ़ आई कंपेयर फॉर 20 years अर्लियर एंड नाउ, what are some of the key things that I see has changed. One, I think mass education has changed. जब हम लोग आए थे और वो गए थे, suddenly mass education was represented by the government sector. प्राइवेट सेक्टर बहुत ही छोटा था, थोड़ा सा ही था, और इसमें बहुत बड़ा बदलाव आया है. And that is really 95 onwards, or let's say 2000 onwards to this thing. And you know everywhere that there is also, उस चेंज में एक बहुत बड़ा बदलाव ये आया है कि जिस तबके के साथ आप काम करना चाहते हैं, वो तबका अब कुछ हिस्सा सरकारी स्कूल में जाता है और बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा उसका आपका लो फी प्राइवेट स्कूल में जाता है. तो अगर आप आज मास एजुकेशन में सोचते हैं तो ये दोनों तबकों को साथ में सोचना पड़ेगा. आप उसके बगैर इस सिनेरियो को देख नहीं पाएंगे. और बिल्कुल उल्टा था कि 20 साल पहले ऐसे लग रहा था कि हम एक पड़ाव पर आए। अगर आप 2002 और 2009 का देखें SSA का, तो फर्स्ट टाइम इन द कंट्री आफ्टर 50 years ऑलमोस्ट एवरीबडी वॉज एनरोल्ड इन स्कूल। एक्सेस मिला, क्वालिटी नहीं मिला, बट एक्सेस भी 80s में नहीं था, 70s में बिल्कुल नहीं था। मतलब जो हमने देखा हुआ है लेट 70s, आई हैव सीन इन तेलोनिया इन 1978, मतलब लेट 70s से लेके आप देखें तो नेवर एनरोल्ड चिल्ड्रन, गर्ल्स। हम जिन स्कूलों में विज्ञान के लिए और सोशल साइंस के लिए जाते थे वो 8वीं में प्राइमरी स्कूल में 100 बच्चे होते थे और मिडिल स्कूल में आते आते वो 40 बच्चे होते थे, और उस 40 बच्चों में से 4 या 5 लड़कियां होती थी। ये बदलाव 2000 तक बहुत बदल गया, और एंड डेफिनेटली बाय द टाइम SSA came into being and RTE was being talked about in a very strong way by a number of groups, तो ये उम्मीद कि बहुत सारे बच्चे स्कूल आ जाएंगे और एक्सेस पाया जाएगा, ये बहुत ही स्ट्रांग था और हो भी पाया। पर इसके साथ एक उल्टी दिशा आ गई, और ये दिशाएं साथ चलती हैं। एक तरफ आपका so many children coming into schools, at the same time a larger chunk of the elite schools, the elite section in the rural things, वो इससे हटने लग गए। तो आप ये कह रहे हो कि बहुत सारे बच्चे आ रहे हैं और एक तबका उसमें से हट रहा है, और वो जो बहुत बड़ा फर्क उस समय आया और उसकी दुर्दशा आज तक हम देख रहे हैं, that most state governments did not pay attention to improving school administration around 2000. They focused on access, they did not focus on not only quality, but quality can only be ensured when you have functional schools. अगर स्कूल से डिसफंक्शनल हो, पढ़ाई नहीं हो, टीचर्स नहीं आ रहे हैं, कुछ नहीं हो रहा, 3 घंटे कर रहे हैं, तो मैं कौन सा पेडागोजी वहाँ करवा लूँगा जो बहुत इनेबलिंग होगा। तो जो एक नॉर्मल फंक्शनिंग ऑफ स्कूल्स है, जहाँ स्कूल्स ठीक से लग रहे हैं, एक समय पर लग रहे हैं, शिक्षक है, उसमें मतलब एक गांव का स्कूल है जिसमें एक टीचर है और वो 20 टीचर शहर के स्कूल में पढ़े हुए हैं, ये विरोधाभास ना हो। ये अभी राहुल मिला था, ये सब लोग उस समय इतना रिसर्च कर रहे थे। तो डिसफंक्शनैलिटी ऑफ द सिस्टम वाज नॉट एड्रेस्ड, और जिसकी खामियां आज आपको बहुत क्लियरली दिख रहा है कि अगर आप गांव-गांव जाएंगे और कहेंगे कि सरकारी स्कूलों को हमको दुरुस्त करना है, तो शायद आपके साथ कोई नहीं खड़ा होगा, और हो सकता है कि आप अलग तरीके सोचे, वो सोचे। तो इतना बड़ा तबका हैज़ लॉस्ट फेथ इन द गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स, इन द रनिंग ऑफ गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स। इस बात को आपको बहुत जहन से सोचना होगा कि पब्लिक सिस्टम्स को चलाने का जो फेथ है पब्लिक से भी और पॉलिटिकल उससे, वो बहुत कमज़ोर हुआ है। तो जहाँ भी आप स्ट्रेंथन करना की कोशिश करते हो, इट गोज आउट। या
So, I mean, in other words, what you said reminds me of this Dipankar Gupta, जो sociologist है, कि एक exit, एक mindset middle class में, दूसरे classes में एक exit mindset आया कि इस system से exit करके खुद अपना system बनाओ या किसी और देश में चले जाओ। तो वैसा एक kind of एक development आप जिससे बोल रहे हैं,
बहुत बड़ा तबका, बहुत बड़ा तबका। मैंने कुछ मित्रों के साथ रिसर्च किया, तो आप अगर एक्चुअली डेटा से देखेंगे तो आप पाएंगे 95 से 2016 तक यूडाइज डेटा के साथ, इन सम स्टेट्स द शिफ्ट इज फ्रॉम गवर्नमेंट स्कूल इज समथिंग ऑफ द ऑर्डर ऑफ 20 to 35%. So in all your places, if you see, you will see that the people in government schools may be around 40%, 50%. कुछ पॉकेट्स होंगे जहां अभी भी ज़्यादा है, पर ये 40-50% बहुत आम है। So the poor are now in low-cost schools, and the absolute poor are in the government schools who feel helpless कि उनके पास साधन नहीं है कि उस दूसरे पर चल जाए। So it's, you're dealing with a mentality when people and teachers are there, but in that institution it's a sort of in a helpless state. So in Madhya Pradesh, if I talk, nobody is actually talking about the mass education. The only thing that they are talking about is the CM Rise schools. The only thing that they are talking about is that we will strengthen these schools.
So एक तरीके से एक टर्फ, अपना एक छोटा सा टर्फ है, उसको प्रोटेक्ट कैसे करें, ऐसा एक माइंडसेट में शायद चला गया। बट अरविंद विल टू
the only thing I'll say कि जो खतरे educationists used to say in the 70s and 80s, you are actually seeing it today. There is a great segregation in education. बहुत बड़ा मल्टी लेयरिंग है और बहुत बड़ा सिस्टम हैज मूव्ड आउट ऑफ द पब्लिक सिस्टम एंड पीपल आर एक्सेसिंग वेरी डिफरेंट लेयर्स ऑफ प्राइवेट स्कूल्स, द पुअर, and their aspirations are all to move out of the public system, and that is the real challenge. I have no magic wand, but I think that is the culmination of at least the forces of 20 years that you are seeing the results today. So the challenges are before you. Thanks.
Thanks, Arvind. So I think that's a kind of probably the single biggest trend in education right now, and all of us are aware of it, but Arvind shared that from his perspective in terms of the deep field work that he's done over the years. So we'll move on to Atanu. In this period, right, I mean, the civil society organizations, right, what's been the transition in brief, and where do things stand now if you look at civil society organizations from your experience in working?
Okay. Hello, can you hear me? First, I would like to actually thanks to IPRO Foundation for organizing such event, and I am very much excited to attend this particular forum. I'll talk from 90s, because without understanding the things happening in 90s, आगे आपको समझना थोड़ा दिक्कत होगा. और I joined this sector in mid 90. I started my career in late 80s with Nehru Yuva Kendra, so youth mobilization and all these things. Then I started teaching in a school. Then mid actually 90 I joined Vikramshila, and I got some kind of understanding about the sector, the civil society organization. Before that I had no idea about the situation. So actually in 90s, if you see, number of things happened. It's a very eventful decade actually. So I start with the actually the globalization and the liberalization process, it took its momentum. और इंडिया में भी देखेंगे तो बहुत सारी चेंजेस हो रहा था, और ग्लोबली भी बहुत सारी चेंजेस हो रहा था. सो स्टार्ट फ्रॉम द कन्वेंशन ऑन राइट्स ऑफ द चाइल्ड, वो बाल अधिकार का बारे में बातचीत स्टार्ट हो गया था, एक डिस्कोर्स. सेकेंड थिंग, अगर वो 90s में देखेंगे, सो नंबर ऑफ ग्लोबल समिट्स वेयर ऑर्गेनाइजिंग एट दैट टाइम. जोमतियन में, वो थाईलैंड में जोमतियन में एक यूनिवर्सलाइजेशन ऑफ प्राइमरी एजुकेशन ए समिट हुआ था. एंड ये जो CRC है, इसमें इंडिया रेटिफाई किया था. जोमतियन में हमने साइन किया, यूनिवर्सलाइजिंग करेंगे हमारा प्राइमरी एजुकेशन को. And 1995 is one of the turning point. Before that, civil society organization, we are working outside the system. If you see the government system, mostly civil society organization, they were working outside the system, and they are trying to reach the most difficult group. अलग अलग कम्युनिटी में वो जोड़ना चाहते थे, उनका साथ काम करना चाहते थे. एंड विक्रमशिला एज ए रिसोर्स ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, वी आर फेसिंग ह्यूज चैलेंज, बिकॉज डोनर दैट टाइम, डोनर ऑल्सो इंटरेस्टेड अबाउट द इम्प्लीमेंटिंग ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, नॉट द टेक्निकल, सो कॉल्ड टेक्निकल सपोर्ट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन और रिसोर्स ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. तो सबका ये था, वो इम्प्लीमेंटिंग ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को सपोर्ट करो. और ज़्यादातर NGO और सिविल सोसाइटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन जिसको कहते हैं, वो गांव-गांव में ऐसे डिफ़िकल्ट कम्युनिटी के साथ काम कर रहे थे. सो दैट वाज द, आई मीन, आउट ऑफ गवर्नमेंट सिस्टम NGOs वो काम कर रहे थे. आई फाउंड largely five types of NGOs and civil society organization. One is those who believes in Gandhian philosophy. So that is one type, Gram Swaraj and rural development. So that was their agenda. Second was actually the philanthropic type organization. So there are many during the mid 90s. And third group is right based organization. Definitely after the Convention on Rights of the Child, number of organizations they are working on child rights, and also other rights, women rights and tribal rights, many things happening. The fourth one, there were many organizations, those who engage in relief work as well as rehabilitation work. And fifth one, but very important one, that is movement oriented organization. And basically the socialist group and the communist, perhaps the frustrated communist, they started this actually organization. And they try to bring all the political parties actually structure in the social sector. So that was the scenario I have found during my early days. Why I am telling that 1995 is a turning point, because that time the huge debate was going on whether direct foreign investment in school education is going to be helpful or not. And World Bank, DFID, they came into the scenario and they started funding. Structural adjustment policy came, and then the name of ministry changed. From education ministry, it's become human resource development ministry. All these things are happening. And in 1995, DPP program started, which was the piloting of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. And that time, first NGO get chance to enter into the system. They started working with the system, working within the system. So that is why I am telling this is the turning point. अगर विक्रमशिला का बात करें तो हम लोग ये जो सिस्टम का साथ नहीं काम कर रहे थे, हम ऐसे अलग अलग ग्रुप का साथ काम किया. एक तो स्कूल्स इन हॉस्पिटल, एक कोर बिलीफ से all children, they are capable of learning and they are willing to learn actually. So ये विश्वास से हमने हॉस्पिटल में जो बच्चा कैंसर में अफेक्टेड है, वो बच्चे का साथ काम शुरू किया था. अभी वो एक लेवल में वो सिस्टम उसको एडॉप्ट किया, वो अभी भी जारी है. एक प्रोग्राम था बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग, और विक्रमशिला जैसे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को बहुत मौका मिले. जल जंगल जमीन जो ग्रुप्स है, particularly the tribal groups, we engage with different states in India. और उसका साथ विक्रमशिला का भी एक ओरिएंटेशन हुआ. जल जंगल जमीन इसका साथ जो इश्यूज है, हाउ दे आर इंटरकनेक्टेड, ये हमने समझ पाए उस टाइम. और कुछ ऐसे ग्रुप है जैसे वेस्ट चंपारण इन बिहार, जहाँ किडनैपिंग और डकैत वो बहुत ही फेमस था उस टाइम, वहाँ एक ग्रुप का साथ काम किया. उड़ीसा में स्नेक चार्मर, और पूरा विलेज जो है स्नेक चार्मिंग के लिए जाते हैं. सो एंगेज विद ऑल दिस ग्रुप्स, it was very learning experience.
Yeah, so keeping in mind the time, so if you look at that period, right, what you're sharing is this entry that civil society organizations got during this period of SSA and the different kind of experiences that Vikramshila got, right? If you sort of look at now and then, like, how do you see that happen? Like, where do things stand now in terms of, like, you can take the example of Vikramshila itself. And
okay.
What are the, yeah.
So, two things I'd like to mention here. Second turning point would be the NCF 2005 and 2001 the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan launched, and 2005 the NCF, and then number of actually the experiment innovation NGOs did earlier, so that is incorporated into the system. That is one turning point. Second turning point would be the CSR actually the act actually in 2013 perhaps. So you know the CSR. So CSR enter into the scenario, and again everything is changed in the sector. So वो CSR का क्या हुआ, वो 2% खर्च करना है, वो अपना किसी ने फाउंडेशन तैयार किया और बहुत सारे प्लेयर उसमें आने लगे, कुछ मैनेजमेंट ओरिएंटेड ऑर्गेनाइजेशन भी शामिल होने लगे. राइट टू एजुकेशन एक्ट 2009 का बाद और एक मैनेजमेंट ओरिएंटेड कुछ ऑर्गेनाइजेशन आए जो स्टेट को हेल्प करने लगे टुवर्ड्स इम्प्लीमेंटिंग द एक्चुअली वो प्रोग्राम सर्व शिक्षा अभियान. अभी जो चेंजेस देखने को आ रहा है, एक बहुत सारी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन मिलकर एक कोalition में काम करने का एक टेंडेंसी आ रहा है. Number of technical organization, some organization those who will actually manage the program, PMU, project management unit, then donor. So donor, technical organization, project management unit, they are working together as a coalition. So that is the one kind of trend. Huge एक टेंडेंसी है वो स्ट्रक्चर दे दो टीचर को. Either we are thinking that teacher is a superhuman, or वो टीचर का ऑटोनॉमी हम बिल्कुल ख़त्म करना चाहते हैं. टीचर को मालूम नहीं है क्या करना है, सबको मालूम है, लेकिन लोग बाहर से जो सोचते हैं वो सोचते हैं टीचर को मालूम नहीं है. तो ये प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है.
Yeah, so I think you can see the rich experience there, the different phases, 3 to 4 different phases in which the very role of civil society organizations have changed. And actually there's a lot more to that. Surely I'm sure some of you would want to catch up with Atanu talking about each of these phases in little more detail. So that's a natural point to move on to Ujjwal as well, because there are more stakeholders, there's more stakeholder diversity now. There was just the government, then civil society comes in, and there are these kind of interplays, and now a lot of private players are there, the funding ecosystem is changing. So would you want to throw some light on
Thanks, Sreekanth. Am I audible? Yeah, let me kind of thank the Wipro Foundation at the outset, and particularly the amazing work that is happening through the larger group of Wipro plus the associated bigger entities. I think it's a matter of immense privilege to be part of a kind of a forum which has been organized by that group, and also the company of Arvindji, both Atanuji, and in front of a variety of organizations which are working in such a committed manner in diverse settings. And I don't know whether I'll have that kind of a time to partake of the learnings from it, but it's very humbling to be part of this kind of a forum. And at the outset, let me also kind of commend the work of organizations such as Eklavya, which have been, like banyan tree. The moment you start conceptualizing anything in education, we feel like referring to what has been the learnings from the work of organizations such as Eklavya. To what extent were they able to kind of influence? What kind of pedagogies did they recommend? What kind of books did they came out with? So it's like, you feel like you are standing in the shade of a tree as you kind of start examining your own work and you start assessing the distance that you have to cover. Now in the talk, or a few thoughts that Sreekanth, you suggested that I could cover, I've tried to kind of divide the three main actors actually in the wider ecosystem. One is the state, the second is the private sector, the third is the civil society. Because if we have to understand the wider situation of the funding, it helps if we kind of touch base on these three, because again, as Shabnam also mentioned this morning, that a fragmented understanding leaves us with somewhat, it just doesn't help us in getting a decent grip actually of where the things are and why they are the way they are. So in terms of the role of the state, quickly, some of the things that have happened since the past 10 to 15 years, if you look at it, I'm talking about from the time the right to education came into effect, which was the effort of several decades of effort by various organizations, movements contributing towards that. and that came into effect in 2009. And after that, there was a huge impetus actually given to access to education. At the same time, an organizational effort, which was ASAR report, started coming into the public domain in terms of bringing to the fore the issues in terms of the quality of education being inadequate. So on one hand, there's a narrative of increasing access, because now education is a right, but at the same time there is a constant narrative which also was kind of rubbing the state in a certain manner constantly and bringing home the point that there is something to be done about quality of education. In 2012, the Sustainable Development Goals actually came into effect, and India, like several other countries, signed on to that. So that was an important shift. Then in 2013, I would say Delhi government saw a very different kind of government come into picture, which also kind of engaged with civil society organizations in an altogether unprecedented ways. So I feel that those experiments are very, very critical, germane, because they are also informing the ways civil society organizations are attempting to kind of engage with the state and with the schooling system. Other than that, we had the new government which came into power in 2014. It had a certain ideological positioning. It also had a certain positioning with respect to increasing the resources of the state. So the CSR Act, which was in any case under discussion in the previous government, it became a law, I believe, either in 2013 or perhaps in 2014, which meant that the state was now kind of in a position to access a certain volume of fund which came from private entities. Then in 2015, Niti Aayog actually, Planning Commission got transformed into Niti Aayog, and Niti Aayog was given the mandate actually of tracking the attainment of sustainable development goals. So which meant that there is a certain demand, or there is a certain expectation that the state started experiencing in terms of coming up with a certain measures so that we are able to move in the direction of SDGs, which also meant that since SDGs were supposed to be very measurable indicators, the narrative of measurement, the narrative of data gathering started gaining steam, and which continues. In 2018, government actually came up with a program of aspirational districts. So 115 districts were identified all across the country which were struggling on certain indicators, and then these districts became kind of entities around which conversations started happening between Niti Aayog and certain entities, be it civil society organizations or even private players. And thereafter we can get into new education policy, which came very recently in 2020, and then the stance of the government towards FCRA, because the government has a certain position towards any organization which it definitely doesn't have a great, if I have to say it is not very comfortable with dissent at all. So which meant actually that FCRA Act came under scrutiny, and so this still continues to kind of cause a lot of discomfort to various civil society organizations. Now in terms of private players, as Tanuda was also kind of mentioning, that past 10 to 15 years post 2009 is we are seeing actually a very different kind of an outlook with respect to private participation. There is a kind of private participation which has a philanthropic bent of mind, which has a certain commitment and a long-term vision into education, which means a certain kind of, I would say, approach which is much more, I would say, patient and trying to understand where the issues lie and then engaging with problems with that orientation. So that is one orientation that the private philanthropic entities, certain private philanthropic entities are showing. And then post 2014, particularly with the advent of the CSR Act, when development work per se came into the ambit of corporate entities, it became a very difficult thing. Well, that is again my personal reading actually into that organizations which are into altogether different kind of works, be it manufacturing cars or manufacturing planes or giving home loans, or be it whatever you say, into very different kind of, their minds have been kind of socialized, so to say, into very different kind of work, and now they have to start looking at nutrition, malnutrition, rights of people, kind of tribal welfare, and most of these organizations operate only out of the big cities. You can't understand India if you are moving from Delhi to Bombay to Bangalore to Hyderabad, because what is happening in, say, Champaran district, or what is happening in Chhindwara district, or in Hailakandi district of Assam, one has to really go there and experience that just to get a sense of what is really worth doing in these kind of geographies. And corporate design of functioning or their objectives are not aligned to it. So in that respect, I don't know who is to be blamed for that, because you have put an objective on somebody's table and the person has to then rise up to it, which also implies that that created a very different kind of a pressure, because the narrative of outcomes or the narrative of feedback, which Sreekanth, you also mentioned, that the corporate entity, by virtue of catering to or delivering services and products to a customer base, is bound to be accountable, because if you don't buy my product or service, I fail to survive. The corporate entity just dies. Unlike a lot of other, not a lot of, but maybe civil society organizations might be in a position to survive because they might get some degree of latitude for a few years. But there is no savior when it comes to a for-profit entity. It has to kind of ensure that the customers are kind of getting the kind of services that they really expect them to get. So this narrative of metrics, this narrative of outcomes and all, which is the ontology of thinking which goes in a corporate domain, वो उसी तरीके से सोचते हैं, उसी तरीके से उनको मेजर किया जाता है और वो उसी चीज़ को समझते भी हैं. उन्हें लगता है अगर मुझे किसी संस्था के बारे में समझना है तो मुझे आंकड़े चाहिए. So which means that they will start expecting that the civil society organization would also, I am kind of accountable for quarterly result, you at least tell me what you will do in 1 year. Now if a civil society organization says that it is going to take 5 years, 10 years, the organization becomes nervous. उन्हें लगता है कुछ तो risky है इस process में, because there is something they are not telling me which is right. Because one is I don't understand, I have been selling cars and then you are selling 5 साल में बताएंगे आप क्या कर पाएंगे, अभी तो समय लगेगा. So I'm saying that there is a different worldview that two entities are coming and talking to each other. And therefore, there are certain entities which understand how to navigate this space, how to navigate the discourse of the state, which is about metrics, which is about indicators, which is also about complex scalable programs. We have spoken to secretaries and all. They say, yes, things can be done in 20 schools, 40 schools, but what about 4,000 schools? There's a book, very famous book, of Seeing Like a State. The secretary in his chair, when he or she has to kind of look at 80,000 schools, 40,000 schools, things appear very different. Many times they don't even trust their teachers. They feel, okay, you are making sense in 20 schools, 30 schools, but I don't know whether 3,000 teachers will accept what you are saying. So there's a complexity associated with scaling of programs, and that is fundamentally because the nature of education is per se about, it has a social character to it. It is about human beings, it is about working with human beings, through human beings, for human beings. अब उसको बदल पाना, उसको समझ पाना requires not just systems and processes, but a very different outlook. So I'm saying that, now I know that we have to kind of conclude. So in 3-4 minutes, 2-3 minutes, let me try to do that. So in civil society organization, there are, if one has to look at the typology of organization, there could be organizations in terms of scale. छोटी पैमाने पे काम कर रहे हैं, hyper local organization जिनको बोलते हैं. They have the kind of, leeway to kind of engage with the state and demonstrate something that could be done. But when it comes to scaling it up, it requires partnership with those organizations which are trying to do something at a larger scale. Because many of the large scale private entities are wanting to tie up with civil society, in case they are wanting. There are corporate entities which are even funding a single school for that matter. I'm talking about H.T. Parekh Foundation. There are at least 5 to 6 single school projects also which the foundation has supported or continues to support. But if they are kind of wanting to do something on 500,000 scale, they will reach out to those partners who are in a position to kind of contribute. So I'm saying that the kind of it is an age of partnerships. One has to understand that what is the need of the state, what is it that we bring to the table, and how can these private players really contribute in the process, because everybody is bringing their strength onto the table. But here I have, the silent, kind of elephant in the room is the political will, whether it exists or not, whether they really want to do. So, and again, there are no easy answers to it. In case there are sites where the government itself says, why don't you do something in, 1 district, 2 district, those become opportunities for CSOs, civil society organizations, to reach out for partnerships with private players who understand what it really takes to deliver, and then force those. So again, no linear thinking over here. It is a function of a lot of ifs and buts and, kind of understanding how they are interpreting, showcasing how much time will it take. If you want a long-term thing, tell that, in 1 year at least this can be done. That is still acceptable rather than, kind of keeping things absolutely nebulous. So this is a little bit about it, maybe difficult to synthesize in a short time, Sreekanth, but please.